The day I found out, I didn't fall apart. I didn't throw dishes or scream into a pillow or call my sister sobbing at 2 in the morning. I stood in my own kitchen, in the house I had cleaned and kept and loved for 11 years, and I felt something settle inside me like a stone dropping to the bottom of a still lake. Quiet. Final. Because I had already been watching. And I had already been preparing. And by the time the truth arrived, I was ready to let it land. My name is Marlo. I'm 35 years old. I live in a house with a wraparound porch in a suburb of Columbus, Ohio, and until 18 months ago, I believed I had the kind of life that most people spend their whole lives trying to build. A husband who kissed me goodbye every morning. A daughter named Grace who was 9 years old and obsessed with horses and still let me braid her hair. A job I loved. I was the office manager at a pediatric dental practice, the kind of place where the walls were painted with cartoon giraffes and the kids got to pick a prize from the treasure chest no matter how brave they were. I made every appointment run smooth. I remembered every parent's name. I was good at being the person who held things together. I was so good at it, I didn't notice how long I'd been holding everything together alone. That's the thing nobody tells you about a slow betrayal. It doesn't arrive like a storm. It arrives like a draft, barely a chill at first, the kind you brush off because you're busy, because you're tired, because you've got a school fundraiser to organize and a dentist's quarterly taxes to file and a 9-year-old who needs new cleats for soccer. You don't stop to ask yourself why the house feels a little colder than it used to. You just go get a sweater. My husband's name was Dennis. Dennis Allen Hargrove. He was 41. A project manager for a mid-sized construction company, broad-shouldered with a laugh that used to fill a room. We met at a mutual friend's 4th of July party when I was 22. He had a paper plate of potato salad in one hand and a very serious opinion about whether sparklers counted as real fireworks, and I thought he was the funniest person I'd ever met. We got married 3 years later in a church outside Dayton where my grandmother had been baptized. I wore her earrings. Dennis cried when he saw me walk down the aisle. I kept that moment in my chest like a pressed flower, something fragile and beautiful and proof that what we had was real. For a long time, it was. But somewhere around year 8, something shifted. I couldn't have pointed to the exact moment. It wasn't one thing. It was 100 small things. Dennis stopping mid-laugh to check his phone. Dennis coming home from work trips with his laundry already done at the hotel, which he'd never done before. Dennis starting to use a second email account I happened to notice when he forgot to switch browser tabs. I saw it for half a second before he clicked away. I didn't say anything. I filed it. I am very good at filing things. If you've ever had that feeling, that quiet, nauseating certainty that something is wrong but you're not ready to know what, stay with me. What I'm about to tell you took everything I had. Subscribe and stay close, because this story is only just beginning. The first crack I couldn't paper over happened on a Tuesday in September. Grace had a soccer game after school. Dennis had promised he'd be there. He'd written it in the kitchen calendar in red marker, circled it, drawn a little soccer ball next to it, because Dennis was always good at the gesture of promising things. I stood on that sideline for 90 minutes. Grace kept looking over her shoulder. I kept telling her daddy was probably stuck in traffic. She scored a goal in the second half and turned to find him in the crowd, and when her eyes found mine instead, I watched her smile dim just slightly, just a flicker, the way a candle dims before it catches itself. She was 9 years old, and she had already learned to adjust her expectations. And I had not yet learned that was not okay. Dennis came home at 8 that night. He said he'd gotten caught in a client meeting that ran over. He brought Grace a gas station candy bar as a peace offering, and she accepted it because she was 9 and loved her father and didn't yet understand that a Reese's cup is not an apology. I accepted it too in my way. I smiled and said it was fine and cleared his dinner plate from the microwave and went to give Grace her bath. But something had changed in me that evening on that soccer field. Something had gone quiet in a way that felt different from the usual tired quiet of being a working mother. Something had decided to start paying attention. Over the next 3 months, I paid attention. Not frantically, I wasn't tearing through his pockets or checking his phone while he slept. I was methodical. I noticed patterns. Dennis used to come home smelling like sawdust and coffee. Now sometimes he came home smelling faintly of something clean and floral, the way a hotel lobby smells. He started going to the gym on Saturday mornings fine, except that he'd never been a gym person in 11 years of marriage. He'd started tucking his shirts in. He bought new shoes without mentioning them, and Dennis always mentioned new shoes because he was particular about shoes. I noticed. I filed. I did not yet move. The second crack happened at Thanksgiving. We hosted at our house that year, my parents, Dennis's mother Linda, his brother Frank, and Frank's wife Carol. I'd been cooking since Wednesday. The turkey, 3 sides, 2 pies, a cranberry sauce from scratch because my mother-in-law made a face the one year I'd used the canned kind. The table looked beautiful. I had put out the good napkins. Grace had made a centerpiece out of construction paper leaves with everyone's names written on them in her careful, loopy handwriting. We were seated, passing the mashed potatoes, and Dennis's phone lit up on the sideboard where he'd left it. I wasn't trying to see it. I just happened to be standing to refill the gravy when the screen illuminated with a text message. Just a preview. Just 2 lines. But 2 lines was enough. I read them in the half-second before the screen went dark, and I stood there holding the gravy boat while everyone at my table laughed at something Frank had said. I set the gravy down. I sat back in my chair. I picked up my fork. I asked my mother how her drive had been. I am very good at holding things together. That night, after everyone had gone home and Grace was in bed and Dennis was watching football in the living room, I sat in the bathroom with the door locked and I breathed. Just breathed. And I made a decision. I was not going to react. I was not going to blow up my daughter's life in a burst of rage that Dennis could later paint as hysteria. I was going to be smart. I was going to be patient. And I was going to make sure that when this ended, I was the one still standing. I started with a lawyer. Her name was Patricia Chin, a woman I'd found through a friend of a friend who said simply, "She's the one you want when things get real." Patricia was 58, sharp, with reading glasses on a beaded chain and the kind of calm that comes from having seen every possible human disaster walk through her door. I told her everything. She listened without reacting, which is somehow both reassuring and terrifying. Then she told me what to do and what not to do, and I followed her instructions to the letter. Document everything. No dates and times. Do not move money. Do not confront. Do not let on. Not yet. I went home and I made Dennis's coffee the next morning and kissed him goodbye and waved from the porch. I was learning the difference between the life I was living in that house and the life I was quietly building somewhere underneath it. Like roots before a tree has broken ground. You can't see the roots, but they're there. And now I need to tell you about Robert. Robert Callahan was Dennis's best friend since college. 32 years of friendship. He was Grace's godfather. He'd been the best man at our wedding. He had a framed photo on his desk at work of himself and Dennis and me from a vacation we'd all taken to Hilton Head in 2016, the 3 of us sunburned and laughing in the surf. I had cooked that man probably 400 dinners. I had sat with his mother in a hospital waiting room when she had her hip replaced. I had helped him pick out an engagement ring for a woman he ended up not proposing to. Robert knew. He had known for a long time. Not a small suspicion, he knew everything. The name, the timeline, the details Dennis had told him in confidence, because that's what you do with your best friend, apparently. You confide in them. You trust them. You let them become the keeper of your secrets while their best friend's wife is at home braiding your goddaughter's hair. I didn't find out about Robert until February. Patricia had recommended I hire an investigator, not to catch Dennis in a dramatic moment, but simply to document a pattern for the legal proceedings she was now preparing. The investigator was thorough. What she gave me wasn't just the evidence I'd expected. It was a recorded phone conversation legally obtained between Dennis and Robert, in which Robert said, and I will not quote him exactly, but the substance was this, that he felt bad about it, but that he'd promised Dennis he'd keep quiet, and that he hoped I never found out because he didn't want to lose me as a friend. He didn't want to lose me as a friend. I sat with that sentence for a long time. Robert Callahan, who had looked me in the eyes at every birthday dinner and every backyard barbecue and every Christmas Eve gathering for the last 6 years, while knowing what he knew, he didn't want to lose me as a friend. He just wanted to keep me as one while making sure I never had the information I needed to protect myself. There are some betrayals that hurt more than the original one. This was one of them. I want to be honest with you about what the bottom felt like, because I think it matters. It wasn't dramatic. It was a Sunday in March, a cold gray day, the kind where the sky looks like wet concrete and the light never quite arrives. Grace was at my mother's for the weekend. Dennis was supposedly at a conference in Cincinnati. I was alone in my house, in my kitchen, looking at the calendar on the wall, the one with all of our family's color-coded appointments, Grace's soccer in green, Dennis's work travel in blue, my work schedule in red. Date nights we'd stopped having years ago, still there in pencil because I'd never erased them. I sat down on the kitchen floor. Not dramatically, I didn't slide down the wall or collapse. I just sat down cross-legged like a child on the linoleum I had mopped 1,000 times, and I thought about how much of my life I had spent maintaining a life that someone else was quietly dismantling. How many mornings I had made coffee for a man who had already decided to leave, but hadn't yet found the courage to say it. How many nights I had locked the door and turned off the porch light and folded the throw blanket on the couch, keeping house for someone who had already moved out in his heart. I sat there for a while. And then I stood up. Because that's what you do. You sit with the hard thing as long as you need to. And then you stand up. If you've ever sat on a floor and then made yourself get back up, you already know what kind of person you are. And you're exactly the kind of person who needs to hear the rest of this story. I filed for divorce on a Wednesday in April. I did it quietly, and I did it with Patricia at my side, and I did it with 11 months of documentation behind me. Dennis was served at his office. I know this because Patricia's assistant called to confirm it had been completed, and in the background I could hear the muffled sound of his office building, and I thought about him reading those papers in the place he considered himself most powerful, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. I felt like myself. The divorce itself took 7 months. Dennis hired a lawyer who specialized in high-conflict situations, which told me a great deal about how he'd been preparing too, except he'd been preparing to fight, and I'd been preparing to win. There's a difference. I wasn't interested in venom. I wasn't interested in scenes or social media posts or any of the performances that divorcing couples sometimes give for an audience that isn't watching as closely as they think. I was interested in grace. I was interested in the house. I was interested in financial security for the next 10 years while my daughter grew up. Patricia was very good. We got the house. We got primary custody. We got a financial settlement that reflected 11 years of my labor, my income that had supported us during 2 stretches when Dennis's company had slow quarters, my sacrifice of career advancement to be the parent who was always available for the school nurse calls and the sick days and the last-minute science fair projects. We got everything that was right. But there's a part of this story I haven't told you yet. The part that I think about when I need to remember that the universe is, occasionally and quietly, paying attention. Robert Callahan had a wife. Her name was Diane. They'd married 4 years ago, a second marriage for both of them. I had been at their wedding. I had given a toast. I had genuinely liked Diane from the moment I met her, a warm, funny woman who ran a small catering business and made the best lemon bars I have ever tasted in my life. After everything came out, Diane called me. She had heard the way people hear things in a community through the invisible current that runs between connected lives. She asked if she could come over. She sat at my kitchen table with a container of those lemon bars, and she told me that when Robert told her the truth, which he did, finally, after the divorce was filed, because secrets have a way of finding the air eventually, she had not stayed quiet the way he had. She had called Robert's employer. Robert worked in compliance at a financial services firm where, she pointed out with a precision that I found deeply admirable, his professional reputation for integrity was the foundation of his entire career. She had told them what she'd told me, that her husband had knowingly assisted in deceiving a spouse in a manner that raised questions about his character and judgment. Robert was not fired. But he was passed over for a promotion he had been expecting for 2 years. And his supervisor had a conversation with him that Robert described to Diane afterward as the most humiliating professional experience of his life. Diane poured me a cup of tea. She slid the lemon bars across the table. "I didn't do it for you," she said. "I did it because he needed to understand that choices have consequences. And because I was furious." She paused. "But I also did it for you a little. We've been friends ever since." Dennis, for his part, got what people who make certain choices usually get, the life they chose. He's living in an apartment in a part of Columbus I rarely drive through. He has Grace on alternating weekends and every other holiday. She still loves him. She's 10 now. She's allowed to love her father, and I would never do anything to interfere with that. But she also knows, in the way children know things without being told explicitly, that the house she lives in, the stability she has, the continuity of her school and her soccer team, and the horse riding lessons we started last spring, all of that is her mother. All of that is me. My wraparound porch still needs painting on the north side. I have a kitchen calendar on the wall, and it's only got 2 colors on it now, Grace's things in green and my things in red, and it is, if I'm being honest, the most beautiful calendar I've ever kept. Clean. Honest. Mine. I went back to school part-time in January. I'm studying practice management and healthcare administration because I realized I'm done making other people's offices run beautifully without any stake in the outcome. I want to build something of my own. Patricia said I should. Diane said I'd be extraordinary at it. Grace said, and I'm quoting exactly, "Mom, obviously." I'm choosing to take that as encouragement. Some nights I sit on that porch after Grace is in bed, and I hold a cup of tea, and I think about the woman I was 11 years ago, in that church outside Dayton, wearing my grandmother's earrings. She wasn't wrong to believe in that day. She wasn't wrong to love what she loved. She just needed to learn something it took her a long time to learn, that the hardest person to see clearly is often the one standing right next to you. And the hardest thing to protect is the life you've built with your own quiet hands. I don't hate Dennis. Hate is a full-time job, and I already have one of those. What I feel for him is something closer to a completed sentence, a thought I had for a long time that finally reached its period. I wish him a life that suits him. I genuinely do. But my life, my actual life, the one I am living in this house on this porch in this city, that is mine and Grace's and no one else's, this life is the best thing I have ever made. If someone has ever underestimated you, stayed quiet while you were the last to know, I want you to leave that in the comments below. I read every single one. And please, share this video with someone who needs to hear that starting over isn't losing. Sometimes starting over is the bravest, most beautiful form of winning there is. Subscribe if you haven't yet, because I have more stories to tell, stories about the women who sit on kitchen floors and then stand back up. Thank you for sitting with me today and hearing this. I hope you carry something from it. And I hope the next time you look at your own life, really look at it, the way I finally learned to, you see something worth protecting. Because you are. And it is. And that is everything.